Hey everybody, we're back with AMA series with Kris Jones and Chris Nash. This is AMA number 91. So today I thought we'd talk about kind of understanding the business of money, but more specifically I think the time frame in our lives at which we start to think about money and finances and just an education that surrounds that. I think, in my opinion, and there are some books out there on the topic which we may get into in a little bit, but the idea being that when you go to education, or whether it's primary school or high school, there's no real courses or information that we get related to sort of making money. And I think it's only afterward and only in college where you start to get into entrepreneurial studies. And I don't even think there's a strong enough focus on that until you get into special schools that focus exclusively on that, and sort of at the business school level where entrepreneurial studies really becomes a core of that. There are programs now, I think they're being integrated at the college level and entire programs connected to that. But in my opinion, I think that it's far too, I don't want to say too late. There's never the wrong time to get started with this. So I wanted to ask you a couple questions related to that in your own life.
Sure.
Of when did you really start in your own let's say career path, or even in your personal life, to start thinking about the business of money, or to start, let's say, quote unquote, following the money?
Mm-hmm. So I was probably, let's just say 17, 18 years old, and my late grandfather, Dick Jones, is my father's father, always wanted to have this conversation with me. And he was the kind of guy that probably never made over, I don't know, $60,000 a year. But he was a salesperson for Highway Equipment, which is a company here in northeastern Pennsylvania that sells big industrial equipment. Mm-hmm. But long story short, he shared with me how he was able to accumulate enough wealth such that before he retired, actually as long as I could remember before he passed, he and my grandmother would be in a new vehicle every 2 to 3 years. They lived in a beautiful house in 40 Fort, and he had shared with me the story that every paycheck that he or my grandmother had ever made, and by the way, my grandmother was retired, and actually I don't even want to say, she was more of like a home wife, right? So
sure. But
whatever income that they had generated, he would save like 15 to 20% of it with just real incredible, impeccable discipline. So long story short, he shared that with me, and then once I was receptive to it, it went on this multi-year discussion every time I was with him, where he would say, hey, do you have 10 minutes? And he would tell me how, like, a Roth IRA, the sooner that you could start maxing out your contributions, the more money that would accumulate through compounding interest, among other strategies that he was using in his own investing. And that the other lesson I would say, so it happened through him, but one other quick little thing, and I'm kind of giving you all of the answers all in one.
That's fine.
But one of the cool things, and I think this is really important for people who are intimidated by money, who believe they don't accumulate enough money to ever be wealthy, that kind of limiting thinking. The cool thing about what my grandfather taught me was that by putting just a little bit away, but doing it consistently, that you build a big nest egg over time. So I don't know, he ingrained that in me. I didn't have any money. I didn't come from wealth.
Sure. But
I had this example in my grandfather, and I thought to myself, well, geez, I should at least follow some of the principles that he's taught me. So probably by the age of 20, I had my own Roth IRA, and I've been contributing to that and other IRAs since.
I think when you hear that too, one of the key things I hear in there is, on some level, you were the idea was to make your money work for you, and
yes.
Interest is one of those ways. And I'm going to reference the book because that reminds me of I think the probably classic book with this thinking and in this series is Think and Grow Rich.
Yeah.
And that book, to me, it outlines the story of two kids growing up in an environment where one child was part of a middle class family whose father taught him sort of the standard, like, go get a stable job, and he had a really close friend whose father was definitely on the sort of wealthier side, thought about the business of money, and taught him the principles of making your money work for you, following the money at a young age, kind of giving them that mindset early, way before sort of traditional schooling ever starts to focus on this. And he walks you down the path of how thinking like that and building assets in your life, true assets. Like most people will tell you, oh, I own this car.
Yeah.
But is a car truly an asset? An asset is anything that truly provides its own income back to you.
Sure.
So if you go out there and acquire assets in your life, that's a mentality that sounds so simple on paper, but the reality is we don't think of it early enough in life. We don't attack it. That's a principle that I learned in that book. I wish I had read that book when I was 8 and thought about it. And for me, just to I'll tell you when I started to think about this is when I was mowing lawns. Was my first job ever, at a couple bucks a pop. And the idea is when you go out there and you start mowing lawns, are you doing it strictly for the idea of making a couple dollars, or is there a learning process involved where you're thinking, how do I leverage this, or how do I think about this so either the next time I'm like, well, maybe can I make a business out of this, or can I use the lessons I'm gaining from this to actually think about the future? I know that sounds so sort of overcooked when you're out there just mowing a lawn, but I think there's a mentality. And there's a lot of people who are successful that'll tell you they think back to those moments where they took those lemonade stands and they thought about them on a big scale. I think you've mentioned before, and maybe you could expound on it, the idea that when you were driving by that hoagie shop and you thought about the guy selling hoagies and how many he would have to sell to make money. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, again, I mean, the story is I was a teenager. I drove by a hoagie shop on Market Street in Kingston, Pennsylvania. And it was a small little hoagie shop, and for whatever the reason, I had this thought, how many hoagies does he have to sell in order to make $1 million? Because, I mean, I guess in our society, if you make $1 million, you're a millionaire. And I wanted to be a millionaire as a teenager, whatever. And I thought to myself, I started thinking about the mathematics behind it. Like, how many would he have to sell in a day, in a week, in a month? And by the way, so that's the story, but that idea of breaking the math down is honestly when I'm thinking about education, is particularly for around money, particularly for people who believe they don't have enough. Here's the thing. People either live below their means, at their means, or above their means. And what I mean by that, let's just assume that you don't want to lead your day-to-day life based on whatever you have in your savings. It's going to be based on your income, your cash flow, what's coming in from your paycheck or from whatever other sources.
Right.
So think about this for a second. If you live below your means, you're going to have excess cash flow. You're going to have excess money coming in that then you could get creative with. You don't have to be a lawyer or a doctor or a surgeon or whatever in order. This idea of living below your means, at your means, or above your means.
And when you say below your means, you mean if you're making a certain amount of money,
there's money left over.
Don't go out there and blow it. Right.
I'm just saying, are you leaving money left over strategically? Remember, I love this topic because it's about education around thinking about money, and people don't do it. So the questions for anybody who's listening, for us too, are we currently living below our means, at our means, or above our means? I'll be honest. At certain points in my life, I've been in any of those.
Sure, likewise.
And in the times where I've either been below or at, I've had more control over being able to put money away or to invest money. So anyway, going back to the hoagie story, I've always thought about wealth accumulation through just basic math principles. Like if you're not saving, right, and 10 years goes by, guess how much money you've saved? Zero.
Yeah.
If you're
I can figure that one out.
If you're saving, let's just play with some basic math here. So if you're saving $10 a month, right, you're saving $120 a year, right? Actually, I have the perfect booyah to this. Ready? So you're saving $100 a month, $1,200 a year, $12,000 over the course of 10 years. So now you have $12,000. Imagine that was 10 years ago when you had that 12 and you invested it in Netflix. Netflix has gone up 57 times 10 years ago. So now you're 12,000.
Take Bitcoin in the last 10 years.
Sure. There's a lot of examples. But just as an example, if you had the $12,000 that you wouldn't have if you weren't saving it,
sure,
and you put it into a Bitcoin, or in this case a Netflix, you actually have 56.7 times its original investment. So if you took that $12,000, you would have a small fortune.
For sure.
So for me, I think wealth accumulation is a lot about math. And honestly, it's about that analysis if you're living below or at or above your means. Think about this too. Let's just say you make $40,000 a year and I make $500,000 a year.
I don't know if that's accurate, but
but I spend like an insane maniac. I am just drinking it away and spending it away, not saving it. And so 10 years goes by and I have absolutely nothing because I have basically drank all my money away and just blew it.
Sure.
But 10 years from now, even though you're making $40K, you took 10% of your income, which is $4,000, right? Assume that that's all taxed out. So you're making post-tax 40, which is pretty good. But so now you have 10% of that over 10 years. You're sitting on a $40,000 nest egg.
That I may have invested or bought other assets with.
Yeah, and I'm assuming
maybe leveraged into an apartment building that I'm making consistent income, whatever it may be.
So anyway, I like, that's how I keep myself in check. It's basic math. It's that simple analysis below. And honestly, I mean, we could get into the more complex, more advanced type of thinking about money, which is like asset allocation and how we think about mitigating risk or taking on risk and all that fun stuff. I will tell you this one thing, just to toot my own darn horn. I was talking to my buddy Spencer Chessman this morning, who's the CEO of iGourmet, and I'm just checking in with him because he lost his pops recently. And we were just chatting about our different business interests. And I said, I didn't say it this way, but what I was thinking was, how proud I actually am of myself from those lessons from my grandfather, from the lessons of all of the books, all of the education that I've given myself over all these years, that while I have had a really great track record with my businesses, not all of them at all given times are going, up and to the right. Sure. Some of them needed more money, et cetera, et cetera. And the moment that I had this morning talking to Spencer was honestly a moment of pride where I thought to myself, even though this particular business over there right now isn't doing what I think it could do, special guest, LSEO, we're crushing it. And so diversification and the ability not to limit yourself just by your income, but by making that income work for you, which is, I know, one of the big messages you wanted to send to the audience within this discussion, is how to get your money to work for you, how to use little tools and tips and strategies to make that money work better.
For sure. And I think you hit a second big tenet. At least I know they promote that in the Think and Grow Rich book as well. But it's the idea that you do need to spend below your total income level and do something with that excess money. And the first thing that anyone typically ever does when they get a new job or they get a raise is they literally go out and spend the money right away. I'm guilty of it in the past. One of the things that's happened to me over time is I've absolutely gotten more shrewd with where I spend my money, and I've gotten more conservative with it, and I've leveraged the income I'm getting into new opportunity and other financial vehicles that are making me money. And most of that's come through getting involved in other businesses because I enjoy that and I know I can help them thrive.
Yep.
But that's one thing that I think you get a lot more worried about, sort of showcasing the wealth in the future, but actually making your wealth work for you. And that's something, if you can start much, much earlier in your life and go out there and educate yourself in this way. There's so many great tenets in a book like that. That's like, everybody should read that as part of their basic education. But I think that's really crucial. So one of the other things that I found that a lot of, and you'll hear this at the highest of levels, and it kind of drives me nuts. People just say, do what you love, and the money will follow. And I don't know if, in my opinion, I don't believe that's accurate, because I think that all the guys that are saying that have already made it, and they've already grinded it out, and they've actually done something different. They've done what they've loved, but they've followed the money at the same time.
Sure.
And that, as I think, is the crucial part two of that step. And part of that is actually building a system, for your own life, where you think about acquiring assets and whatever it is, whether it's renting the other side of your double block out, and now your actual residence is starting to be a true asset to you versus just your home not actually providing any value back to you. So listen, you may get equity in the business, but unless it's actually paying you out monthly, it's not a true asset.
Sure.
That's a really key difference in what we're talking about here. But can you think of an instance for yourself when you have a difference between sort of just doing what you love for the sake of it or doing what you love and attaching the following the money characteristic to it?
That's actually a good question. I mean, I think it's somewhat unfair because I'm a professional investor. So what I would say is that...
But haven't on some level, even if it's accidental, haven't your interests been directly connected to following the money?
Definitely.
Because of that? As opposed to just going out and having a hobby and thinking, oh, well, I love collecting stamps.
Absolutely.
And it eventually it's going to turn into a money-making endeavor. You actually have to connect part two
Absolutely.
To making money.
Absolutely. What I was going to say on the investor mindset is that I look for big industries that, that have a lot of market share available, but on a more sort of specific level, I mean, I'm somewhat guilty. I mean, my education, even though I went to law school, I didn't go to law school to become an attorney. I studied psychology undergrad and graduate school, so I'm not sure I could plant the victory flag.
Sure.
However, I've thought about when I do enter an industry, like for instance, digital marketing. I think that where there's a ton of scale, meaning there's a ton of opportunity to sell a lot of something, I absolutely focus my energy there, and I try to think through, how I could build the infrastructure and put in place procedures and whatnot to scale those types of things. And I've been very careful not to limit myself by going into sort of a dead-end type of area where either I can't figure out how to scale it or I just don't see the market appeal or the market trend for it.
Sure.
So,
but didn't on some level, I mean, did your career in this way really start until post law school? I mean, you were kind of building something while you were still going to school, and then it blossomed from there. Do you feel like you made a transition from sort of maybe contemplating working for somebody else versus starting to following your own business acumen at that point? Was there a fork in the road at that point?
Here's the thing, and I don't want to kill this idea. In a weird way, I realized fairly early in my career that if I focus on just giving value and focusing on solving problems and showing up with a great attitude, in a weird way, I felt that I was going to be a force and I would make money. In a startling way. On the one hand, I have definitely put in place the mechanics to generate wealth. I mean, I've talked about it in previous AMAs that I had set a goal. I wrote a goal down that by the time I was 30, I was going to be a millionaire. I became a millionaire when I was 23 by simply having that goal and putting the mechanics behind it. Number one, find something that works. Number two, replicate it. Number three, scale it. And I've talked about that in previous AMAs. So I don't know. I'm mechanical. In terms of my end result, I'm mathematical.
I hear that, though, and I think you take for granted that you were going to make money in the process. And you've always had that. You've always had that mentality. And that, I think that's exactly the point, is you have to connect part two with part one. You have the passion, and you channel part of that passion. And if that's your goal, if it has no relevance to you, and I want to make money. I mean, I don't want to pretend that that's not true. And I think being practical about how that comes out and having that education as early as possible is kind of is the main message.
Yep.
So thank you guys, appreciate it. I think we're going to cut it off there. Peace.
Peace out.